Welcome to the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button so you don't miss any more shocking and captivating stories. Enjoy watching. John Reed was waiting at the valet stand staring at his phone, a mix of anticipation and anxiety building in his chest. The night had been long, but he'd been looking forward to picking up his wife, Sarah, from the corporate gala she'd been attending. It was one of those high-profile events, wealthy executives, fancy clothes, cocktails flowing freely. Sarah had been invited by her company, and John had heard a lot about it in passing conversations, though he knew little about what went on behind the walls of that glittering world. The valet gave him a strange look as he handed over his car keys. The young man didn't smile, just glanced at John, then quickly looked away. It was subtle, but it caught John off guard. He frowned, wondering if the guy had recognized him or maybe had seen something strange. He couldn't place it, but there was something about the moment that felt off. John had never been one to doubt Sarah. They had been married for 5 years now. They had met in college, had their ups and downs, but he'd always trusted her, or at least he used to. Lately there had been subtle shifts in Sarah's behavior. She was always a little distant when they spoke, sometimes lost in thought, distracted even when they were alone. There were odd excuses too: late night phone calls, last-minute work dinners, the vague responses when he asked about her day. It wasn't obvious, but the small things added up. He started to notice that she no longer gave him the same attention she once did. When they would watch TV together, she would scroll through her phone, rarely looking up. Then there was the way she'd become more private. Sarah, who used to share everything with him, her thoughts, her feelings, her little victories, had become closed off. Sometimes she'd act like he was bothering her when he tried to talk about their future, about having kids, about their life outside of her career, but the real turning point came 2 weeks ago. John had been sitting in their living room, scrolling through some emails, when his phone buzzed with a notification. It was an Instagram message, an unfamiliar name. The message was simple: "Looking forward to seeing you again tonight." It wasn't just the fact that it was from another man. It was the casual tone, the flirtatious nature that made John's stomach churn. He'd asked Sarah about it later that evening, pretending he hadn't seen the message. She had laughed it off, brushing it aside with a story about a work colleague who had sent her a funny joke. John had accepted the explanation, but the doubt lingered like a shadow. And now, as he waited for Sarah to come out of the gala, that shadow was getting bigger. The valet returned with his car and John got in, trying to push the thoughts away. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe Sarah was just focused on her career, just needed some space. But deep down, he knew the feeling in his gut wasn't just paranoia. Something was wrong. He drove the short distance to the event, arriving at the hotel just as the valet helped another couple inside. He parked and sat in the car for a moment, staring at the entrance of the building. The night was cool, the streetlights casting long shadows across the parking lot. He checked his watch, 9:45 p.m. Sarah had texted him earlier that the event was winding down around 9:30. She should be out by now. But there was no sign of her. John's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Sarah. "Running a little late, don't wait up for me." The text didn't sit right with him. It was unlike Sarah to send a message like that, especially when they had made plans to leave together. She was usually so punctual, so dependable. John's hand tightened on the steering wheel. Maybe she was busy talking to colleagues, or perhaps there was another late-night business meeting. But something about the way the message was worded, the distant tone, it just didn't match Sarah's usual warmth. He stepped out of the car and made his way to the entrance of the event, scanning the crowd of people milling about. He saw couples laughing, chatting, and shaking hands, but there was no sign of Sarah. His heart raced in his chest. The valet, who had given him that strange look earlier, was now standing by the entrance, a clipboard in hand, looking like he was ready to close up for the night. John approached him, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hey, have you seen a woman come out, Sarah Reed? She's about 5'5", blonde hair, wearing a blue dress." The valet nodded slowly, almost reluctantly. "I think I saw her leave with someone earlier. Not sure if it was her husband, though." John's mind raced. What do you mean? What do you mean, not her husband?" The valet shrugged. "I don't know, man. She was with a guy. Seemed familiar, but I didn't catch his name." John's throat tightened, and for a moment he thought he might choke on his own breath. His heart began to beat faster, panic creeping in. He thanked the valet and rushed back to his car, his mind reeling. A guy. Was she leaving with someone else? He couldn't believe it. The scenario played over and over in his mind. What was going on? Was it just a coincidence? But why did it feel like something deeper? He grabbed his phone, hoping Sarah had messaged him again, but there was nothing. He slammed the car door shut, his thoughts spinning. He was supposed to trust her. He had to trust her. But the doubt had already taken root, and now it was growing uncontrollably, pushing him into a space he couldn't escape. The world around him seemed suddenly too loud, the streetlights too harsh. He had to find out what was really happening. His heart sank as he realized he wasn't just suspicious anymore. He was terrified. John's hands gripped the steering wheel as he sat in the parking lot. The lights of the hotel casting a pale glow over everything. He couldn't just sit there anymore. The valet's words kept echoing in his head. She was with a guy. 1,000 thoughts ran through his mind, each one darker than the last. Who was this man? Was it someone from her work? Someone she'd met tonight? Or was it someone else entirely? John turned on the engine and drove out of the parking lot, heading toward the main road. His heart was pounding in his chest, and a pit of dread was growing in his stomach. He tried to tell himself to calm down, to think rationally. He had no proof, no evidence. Maybe it was nothing, but something in his gut told him this wasn't just his imagination running wild. As he drove through the quiet streets, he started thinking about the past few weeks. The change in Sarah's behavior had been gradual but undeniable. Little things, like the way she'd become more secretive with her phone, or how she'd start avoiding certain topics of conversation. He remembered a few nights when she'd been vague about her whereabouts or had come home late, claiming work had kept her longer than expected. John had convinced himself over and over again that he was being paranoid. After all, she'd always been dedicated to her career, always had a lot on her plate. But now, with the valet's cryptic remark, everything felt like it was spiraling out of his control. He pulled into the small cafe where Sarah sometimes liked to grab coffee after work. It was just a few blocks from the hotel, and he thought he might find some clue, some lead, anything. As he parked, he saw the familiar figure of a man walking out, adjusting his coat. The man was tall, with dark hair and an expensive-looking suit. He was holding a woman's purse in his hand. John's breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. The man turned, and for a split second their eyes met. The man's face froze, just a flicker of recognition. It was as if he had been caught in the act of something he wasn't supposed to do. He quickly turned his head and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. John sat there for a moment, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure what to do next. He wanted to follow the man, confront him. But he was paralyzed, caught between anger and confusion. What was Sarah doing with him? Why was she leaving with him? Finally, he stepped out of the car and made his way to the cafe door, trying to calm his nerves. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and the familiar smell of coffee filled his nostrils. He walked up to the counter, his eyes scanning the room. There was a couple sitting in the corner, but nothing unusual. No sign of Sarah. He walked up to the barista, a young woman with a friendly smile. "Hey, I was just wondering, do you remember if Sarah Reed was here tonight? I'm her husband, and I was trying to get in touch with her." The barista's smile faltered for just a moment, before she nodded. "Yeah, she was here with someone earlier. She didn't stay long though, maybe 20 minutes. John's mind raced. The other man, had Sarah been meeting him here too? Was this some kind of pattern? Who was she with? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The barista hesitated. "I'm not sure. They didn't seem like they were together, you know? But she did seem comfortable with him. Maybe someone from work. I don't know." Sorry, John felt his frustration build. She had been comfortable with him. That was all he needed to hear. She wasn't acting like a woman with a husband at home. "Thanks," he said, his voice cold. He turned and left the cafe, heading back to his car. The air felt thick, like everything was closing in on him. His mind was spinning, but he couldn't stop himself. He had to know more. He had to confront Sarah. John drove back to the hotel, his thoughts consumed by the questions he couldn't answer. He pulled into the parking garage and parked in the same spot. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Sarah. "Just got home. Was good to catch up with everyone tonight." His stomach churned. So, she was home now. But was she really at home? Or was she lying to him, trying to cover up what had happened? John stared at the text for a long time. Something about the casual tone felt off, like she was trying to convince herself more than him that everything was normal. He clicked the button to start his car and drove toward their house. As he made the drive, memories of their happier moments together flashed in his mind. The first time they met, their first vacation, the way she used to smile at him after a long day at work. But now, it felt like everything had changed. The love they'd built felt fragile, like it could crumble at any moment. When he arrived at their house, he parked in the driveway and sat in the car for a moment. The house was dark, save for the soft glow of the living room lamp. Sarah's car was parked in the garage, and the door to the house was slightly ajar. John's pulse quickened. He stepped out of the car, his footsteps heavy on the driveway. As he approached the front door, he hesitated for just a second, wondering what he would find. Was Sarah really home, or was she still out there with him? He pushed the door open slowly, trying to control the nervous energy surging through him. The house was quiet, too quiet. He called out, his voice a little shaky. "Sarah." There was no response at first. Then, faintly, he heard her voice coming from the kitchen. It was soft, muffled, like she was talking to someone. John's heart sank. Who was she talking to? He took a deep breath and walked toward the kitchen. His footsteps echoed in the silence. As he rounded the corner, he froze. There, standing at the counter with a glass of wine in her hand, was Sarah. But she wasn't alone. A man stood next to her, laughing at something she had said, his hand on the counter as he leaned in toward her. John recognized him immediately. The man from the cafe, the one he had seen earlier. John's pulse thudded in his ears. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, as if everything was shifting, coming apart in slow motion. Sarah's head snapped around as she saw him. Her eyes widened, a look of panic flashing across her face. She quickly pulled away from the man, as if caught doing something she couldn't deny. "John, I didn't expect you home so soon," Sarah stammered, her face flushing. John felt his chest tighten, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "What's going on, Sarah?" His voice was low, barely a whisper, but it was thick with emotion. "Who is he?" The room felt suffocating, as if the walls were closing in on John. His eyes darted from Sarah to the man standing beside her, who was still holding his glass of wine as if nothing was wrong. The tension in the room was so thick it could be cut with a knife. For a long moment, Sarah didn't say anything. She just stood there, her hand still clutching the glass, her gaze shifting nervously between John and the man. It was the first time John had seen her look this unsure, vulnerable even. The man, realizing that the situation was more serious than he'd expected, took a step back, placing his drink down on the counter. He opened his mouth, as if to speak, but John raised his hand, silencing him. "Who the hell are you?" John's voice was icy, barely containing the rage simmering beneath the surface. The man glanced at Sarah, a silent question passing between them. She gave him a barely perceptible nod, and he sighed. "I'm Chris. We met through work," he said, his voice casual, too casual for the situation. He offered John a smile that didn't reach his eyes. John looked at him for a moment, then turned back to Sarah. His mind was spinning. "Chris, work." The lie was so transparent, so weak it stung. "Sarah," he said, his voice quieter now, but full of something darker. "Is this what it looks like?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but then closed it again. She swallowed hard. "John, it's not what?" He cut her off, his heart pounding. "I saw you leave with him tonight. I saw you leave with him." He gestured toward Chris. "And now you're here, alone with him. In our house." Sarah's face flushed, and she took a step toward him. "John, please, let me explain." John's frustration was building, his pulse racing. "Explain what? That you've been lying to me for weeks? That you've been sneaking around behind my back?" His voice cracked, the hurt evident now. "Explain why you couldn't be honest with me. Why you couldn't just tell me what's going on." For the first time in what felt like forever, John felt a deep sense of betrayal that he couldn't shake. Sarah had always been the one who told him everything, the one who knew him better than anyone. But now it felt like she was a stranger. "John, it's not like that," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Chris is a colleague. We've been working on a project together for the last couple of months. I didn't think it would be a big deal." John could barely process her words. It was as if his brain had to catch up to the reality of what she was saying. "A project," he repeated. "Is that why you've been coming home late? Is that why you've been so distant? And is that why you couldn't even be honest with me when I asked you about it?" He turned his gaze to Chris, who was standing there like a silent observer. "And you? What, you just thought this was all normal? Thought you could just come here into my house and pretend everything's fine?" Chris opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah quickly stepped forward, cutting him off. "John, please, it's not what you think. It's just work. We've been spending more time together, and yes, I've been distant lately, but that's because I've been overwhelmed. This isn't what you think it is." John stared at her, his chest tightening with every word she spoke. Overwhelmed. She was overwhelmed. He had tried so hard to be understanding. He had tried to give her space, to not be the jealous husband. But now it was clear that she wasn't overwhelmed. She was hiding something from him. Hiding something that had been going on for a while. "Sarah, you really expect me to believe that?" John asked, his voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You've been so distant with me, you've been lying about your whereabouts, and now you expect me to believe it's all just work? Just a project?" Sarah's face crumpled. tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't want to hurt you, John," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you." John felt a sharp pang in his chest, but he didn't know whether it was from her words or the crushing weight of his own heart breaking. "You have hurt me, Sarah. You've been hurting me for months, and I've been too blind to see it." There was a long silence between them, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Sarah looked like she wanted to say more, but she was choking on her words. And Chris, he just stood there, awkwardly unsure whether to intervene or not. But John wasn't interested in talking to him anymore. This wasn't about Chris. This was about Sarah. He turned to Chris and said, "You should go." His voice was low and controlled, but there was no mistaking the finality in it. Chris didn't argue. He grabbed his jacket, shot a quick glance at Sarah, and walked toward the door. John didn't look back as he heard the door close behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah took a step forward, her voice small. "John, I swear there's nothing more to it. I never meant for things to get this far, but I've been feeling so lost lately, and Chris, he's been the only one who understood. He's been there for me when I felt like you didn't see me anymore." The words hit John like a slap to the face. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell her how wrong she was, how she had betrayed him in the worst possible way. But instead he felt numb. The love he had once felt for her now felt like a distant memory. "I don't even know who you are anymore, Sarah," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "I don't recognize you, and I don't think I ever will again." The words hung in the air, heavy and painful. Sarah stood there, frozen, her face crumpled in distress. But John couldn't bring himself to feel sympathy, not right now. Not after everything she had done to him. He turned toward the door, his hand trembling as he reached for the handle. "I'm done. I'm done trying to fix this. I'm done pretending this isn't happening." Sarah reached out, her voice cracking as she called after him. "John, please don't leave me. Please don't give up on us." But John didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Sarah standing in the silence, alone with the consequences of her actions. John stepped outside into the cool night air, the weight of the world pressing down on his chest. But for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a small sliver of relief. The truth had come out. He wasn't blind anymore, and he wouldn't let her drag him down any longer. He got into his car, started the engine, and drove away. The days that followed felt like a blur to John. He had left Sarah, but it wasn't as simple as walking away from a relationship. His mind replayed the confrontation in the kitchen over and over again. Her tear-filled eyes, her desperate voice calling after him, "Please don't give up on us." But the words didn't move him anymore. The trust was shattered beyond repair. For the first time in months, John felt like he could breathe again. It was like he'd been suffocating in a fog of doubt and betrayal, and now the air felt clear. But that didn't mean it was easy. Every corner of their house, every photograph on the walls, reminded him of the life they had built together. It was like watching a dream fall apart in slow motion, and as much as he wanted to erase the pain, he couldn't escape it. He hadn't heard from Sarah in 2 days. Part of him expected her to show up, to apologize, to beg him to come back. But she hadn't. Instead, he found himself scrolling through his phone, rereading the old texts, the messages they'd shared. He didn't know why, maybe to remind himself of how things used to be, before everything changed. But it only made the hurt worse. Then came the email. It was early Saturday morning when John checked his inbox. Among the usual work-related emails, there was one from Sarah. His stomach clenched as he clicked it open. Subject: "For what it's worth, John. I don't expect you to read this, but I need to say it. I owe you that much. I'm sorry. For everything. For the lies, for the way I've treated you. I know I can't fix it, but I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I let myself get lost in things I shouldn't have. In my work, in the attention I thought I needed. In him. I thought I could handle it, but I couldn't. And now I've lost you, and I hate myself for that. I've been an idiot. I wish I could turn back time. I really do, but I can't. I just hope one day you can forgive me, for whatever it's worth." Sarah. John sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. He didn't feel relief. He didn't feel vindicated. He just felt numb. The email was full of the words he wanted to hear a few days ago, but now they felt empty. How could he believe her now? The truth had already been laid out. And forgiveness wasn't something he could just give away. He stared at the email for a long time, then hit delete. It wasn't closure, at least not the kind he'd hoped for. But it was a step forward. A week passed, and life continued, though everything felt different. John had moved into an apartment downtown. It was smaller than the house they had shared, but it was his own space. No more waking up to Sarah's empty side of the bed. No more pretending that things were fine when they clearly weren't. He spent his days working, trying to distract himself from the painful reality of his new life. But late at night, when the world was quiet and still, his mind wandered back to Sarah. He would think about the times they'd spent together, the dinners, the vacations, the small moments that used to mean everything to him. And he would wonder for a brief moment if it had all been a lie, but then he would shake his head. No, it wasn't a lie. She had loved him once. He had no doubt about that. But somewhere along the way, something had changed. And as much as it hurt, John knew that nothing could undo that change. A few days later, John was walking into a small cafe when he saw Sarah sitting at a corner table. She looked different. Her eyes were tired, her face drawn, like she hadn't slept in days. For a second, he thought about turning around, leaving without speaking to her. But something inside him made him stop. He walked over to her, his steps hesitant but firm. She looked up in surprise, then quickly looked away as if she hadn't expected him to come. John said softly, standing next to the table. He didn't sit down. He wasn't sure if he could. "Hey," she replied, her voice weak. "I didn't expect to see you." John took a deep breath. He didn't know what he was hoping for. Closure, maybe. Or just the chance to see her one last time before everything truly ended. "I got your email," he said, his voice low but steady. Sarah looked down at her hands, which were resting on the table. She didn't say anything, just nodded, as if she knew what was coming. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, Sarah," John continued, his words slow and deliberate. "I don't know if I'll ever trust you again, but I need you to know I'm not angry anymore. I don't think I ever was. I feel sad. And I think you do, too." She looked up at him then, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I am," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, John. I didn't want to hurt you. I never meant to." John nodded, his heart heavy but resolute. "I know you didn't mean to. But you did, and that's something I have to live with." He paused, then added, "I have to move on. For both of us." Sarah wiped her eyes, looking away. "I understand. I really do." For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. The weight of the past hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. "Take care of yourself, Sarah," John said finally. "I hope you find what you're looking for." And with that, he turned and walked away. It wasn't the dramatic, tearful ending that Sarah might have hoped for. It wasn't the angry confrontation that John had envisioned in his darker moments. It was just over. And sometimes, that's the hardest kind of ending. As John walked out of the cafe, he felt an odd sense of peace. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it wasn't consuming him anymore. The truth had come out, and with it, the freedom to move on. He had learned that sometimes, the only way forward was to let go of the past. And for the first time in a long while, John Reed felt like he could breathe again. The end.